At my grandson's baptism, my white daughter-in-law Victoria leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Rose, please don't sing those songs today. This is a proper ceremony." I looked her dead in the eye and sang Amazing Grace louder than I had ever sung in my life. The entire congregation turned to stare, but I didn't care. For 3 years, this woman had been trying to erase me from my own family, and I was done staying quiet. My name is Rose Washington, and I'm 65 years old. I raised my son Marcus alone after his father died when Marcus was 12. I worked 2 jobs, put him through college, and watched him become a successful lawyer. I was proud of the man he became. Then he married Victoria. Victoria Palmer came from what she called good stock, a white family with old money and older prejudices. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that never reached those eyes when she looked at me. From the moment Marcus brought her home, Victoria made it clear that I didn't fit into her vision of their future. But she was clever about it. Never openly rude, just exclusionary. "Oh, Rose, we already made dinner reservations for 2, she'd say when Marcus invited me to join them. "Maybe next time. The baby shower is just for Victoria's side of the family," Marcus would explain apologetically. "You understand, right, Mom?" I understood perfectly. I understood that my white daughter-in-law was systematically cutting me out of my son's life, and he was too blind to see it. But what I discovered she was doing to my 4-year-old grandson, Christopher, was so much worse than I could have imagined. And what I did about it at that baptism destroyed her perfect little world forever. The day I found out the truth, I was babysitting Christopher while Marcus and Victoria went to some charity gala. Christopher was playing with his toy cars when he suddenly looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes. "Grandma Rose, why does Mommy say you're different?" "Different how, baby?" "She says you're not really family because you don't look like us. She says that's why I can't tell people at school about you." My heart stopped. Victoria had been telling my grandson to hide me from his classmates. "What else does Mommy say about me?" Christopher looked scared, like he was about to get in trouble. "She says if I act too much like you, people won't want to be my friend. She says I have to be more like Daddy's side." I held that little boy close and promised him that everything was going to be okay. But inside, I was planning Victoria's complete and total destruction, because nobody, and I mean nobody, was going to teach my grandson to be ashamed of being black. That night, after I put Christopher to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Victoria was teaching my grandson to hide his black heritage, to be ashamed of me. I decided to do some investigating. The next morning, I drove to Christopher's preschool during pickup time. I wanted to see how Victoria interacted with the other parents, how she presented our family. I parked across the street and watched as Victoria walked up to a group of white mothers. They were all laughing and chatting, and Victoria fit right in with her designer clothes and perfect blonde hair. Then I heard something that made my blood boil. One of the mothers asked, "Victoria, is Christopher's father black? He has such beautiful features." Victoria's response nearly knocked me out of my car. "Oh no, Marcus is mixed, but he's practically white. Christopher takes after his grandfather on Marcus's side. He was Italian. Italian." My deceased husband, Robert Washington, who was as black as the day is long, had just been turned Italian by my daughter-in-law. But it got worse. "And what about his grandmother?" another mother asked. "Which one?" Victoria laughed. "My mother adores Christopher, Marcus's mother. Well, she's not really involved much. Different backgrounds, you know how it is. Different backgrounds." That's how she explained away 3 years of me raising Christopher while she got her nails done. I drove home shaking with rage, but I needed more evidence before I confronted anyone. That weekend, Marcus and Victoria went to some work function, and I was babysitting Christopher again. While he napped, I did something I had never done before. I went through Victoria's things. In her home office, I found a folder marked Family Documents. Inside were school enrollment forms for Christopher. Under Emergency Contacts, Victoria had listed her parents first, then Marcus, then her sister. My name was nowhere on the forms, but that wasn't the worst part. Under Race Ethnicity, she had checked White Caucasian only. My grandson, who was half black, had been enrolled in school as a white child. I kept digging through her papers and found something that made me sick to my stomach. It was a printed email thread between Victoria and her mother. Victoria's email read, "Mom, I'm trying to minimize Christopher's exposure to Rose's side of the family. The cultural differences are just too much, and I don't want Christopher confused about his identity. Marcus agrees that Christopher should identify with our family traditions." Her mother's response, "Good for you, honey. Children need stability, not all that urban nonsense. You're doing the right thing." Urban nonsense. They were talking about my family's 100-year history of gospel music, Sunday dinners, and church traditions like it was something shameful. But the final email in the thread was what broke my heart. "I've been telling people at the club that Marcus is Mediterranean. It's easier that way, and Christopher can pass for white if we're careful about it. Pass for white." They wanted my grandson to pass for white. I printed out every single email and put them in my purse. Then I found Victoria's social media accounts on her computer. What I saw there was a complete rewriting of our family history. Photo after photo of Victoria, Marcus, and Christopher at family events. But in every single picture, Marcus looked ambiguously ethnic, maybe Italian, maybe Spanish, but definitely not black. And Christopher, with his light brown skin, could have been anything. The captions were even worse. "Family beach day with my Mediterranean husband and our little angel. Christopher gets his beautiful olive complexion from Daddy's side. 3 generations of the Palmer family," posted with a picture of Christopher, Marcus, Victoria, and Victoria's parents. I wasn't in the shot, even though I had been standing right there when the picture was taken. I scrolled through 3 years of posts. 3 years of family birthdays, holidays, vacations, and milestones. I was in exactly 0 photos. It was like I didn't exist, but the comments from Victoria's friends were what really got to me. "Christopher is such a beautiful boy. He's going to be a heartbreaker. I love how exotic Marcus looks. What's his background? You have such a gorgeous family, Victoria. Perfect genes, perfect genes. Like my genes were something to be ashamed of." I was about to close the computer when I saw a private message thread between Victoria and her college roommate. The messages were from just last week. Victoria, "I swear, Rose is trying to turn Christopher into some stereotype. She taught him some gospel song and he was singing it at school. I'm mortified." Friend, "Can't Marcus control his mother?" Victoria, "He tries, but she's very assertive. You know how they can be. I'm thinking of moving somewhere she can't follow us. Maybe back to Connecticut where Chris can grow up around normal families." Normal families. I wasn't normal. I was something to be escaped from. The next message made me grab the desk to steady myself. Victoria, "The worst part is Chris actually likes spending time with her. She fills his head with all this pride nonsense about being black. I keep telling him he's lucky he doesn't look too ethnic, but she's undoing all my work. Pride nonsense. Teaching my grandson to be proud of his heritage was nonsense." I printed out every single message and added them to my growing file of evidence. When Marcus came to pick up Christopher that evening, I watched him differently. I noticed how he let Victoria do all the talking about Christopher's school, his activities, his friends. I noticed how he didn't correct her when she talked about our family traditions, like my family had never existed. After they left, I called my sister Angela, who lived in Atlanta. "Angela, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. When Marcus and Victoria visit you, how does Victoria act?" There was a long pause. "Rose, honey, they've never visited me. Marcus told me you all were too busy with Victoria's family obligations. What about Christopher's birthday parties? Victoria said you couldn't make it. Rose, I never got an invitation to Christopher's birthday. I've been sending gifts to your house because I didn't have their address. My sister had been cut out too. Victoria hadn't just been erasing me. She had been erasing my entire side of the family. Angela, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to call Marcus and ask him about Christopher's baptism next month. Tell him you'd love to come celebrate with the family." 2 days later, Angela called me back. Rose, Marcus told me the baptism was going to be very small, just immediate family. He said Victoria's family was handling all the arrangements. Immediate family. After 3 years of raising Christopher, I wasn't immediate family. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Victoria privately. I wasn't going to try to work things out through Marcus. I wasn't going to give her a chance to lie or manipulate her way out of this. I was going to let her destroy herself publicly, in front of everyone she was trying to impress. The baptism was in 3 weeks. Victoria had no idea that I knew about her emails, her lies, her systematic erasure of my family. She was about to find out that you don't mess with a black grandmother's legacy. And when I was done with her, everyone in that church was going to know exactly what kind of person Victoria Palmer really was. The next week, I started my own investigation into Victoria's background. If she wanted to play family history games, I was going to play to win. I hired a private investigator named James Miller, a retired police detective who specialized in background checks. I gave him everything I knew about Victoria Palmer and asked him to dig deeper. What he found was even worse than I had imagined. Victoria had been lying about more than just my family. She had been lying about everything. The old money Palmer family wasn't old money at all. Victoria's father was a car salesman from New Jersey who had legally changed his name from Palumbo to Palmer when Victoria was in high school. Her mother worked as a secretary at a dental office. Victoria herself had lied on her resume about graduating from Columbia University. She had actually graduated from a community college in Newark. The charity work she was always bragging about? The investigator found records showing she had volunteered exactly twice in the past 5 years. But the most damaging information was what he found about Victoria's social media activity on private accounts under fake names. She had been posting in white nationalist forums. I stared at the screenshots James had printed out, my hands shaking. Victoria had been posting about maintaining racial purity and protecting white children from cultural contamination. One post from just 2 months ago read, "Married a half-breed, but the kid passes for white. Working on phasing out the ethnic influences before permanent damage is done." Half-breed. She was talking about my son. Ethnic influences. She was talking about me. Another post. "In-laws trying to force their ghetto culture on my child, thinking about relocation to preserve family values." Ghetto culture. Our Sunday gospel songs and family dinners were ghetto culture, but the post that made me see red was from last week. Child showing disturbing attachment to undesirable family members. Considering legal options to limit access. Need advice on cutting off parental grandparents without causing divorce. She was planning to cut me off legally and asking white supremacists for advice on how to do it. I called James immediately. "I need you to document everything. Every post, every comment, every interaction. And I need you to trace her real social media accounts, the ones she shows her friends." 2 days later, he called me back. "Mrs. Washington, you need to see this in person." I met James at his office, and he showed me printouts that made my stomach turn. Victoria's public social media was full of posts about diversity and inclusion. She had pictures of herself at charity events for underprivileged children. She had shared articles about racial equality and posted messages of support during Black History Month. But her private messages told a different story. In a group chat with her college friends, she had written, "Playing the supportive wife role at Marcus's diversity events. These people have no idea what I really think about their handout culture." In another message, "Christopher is getting too comfortable with his black side. Need to nip this in the bud before he starts thinking that's actually his identity." And the most recent message from just 3 days ago, "Marcus's mother is becoming a problem. She's undoing all my work with Christopher. Might be time for some dramatic intervention." Dramatic intervention. What did that mean? I asked James to keep monitoring her accounts, and I started planning my counterattack. The baptism was now just 10 days away. Victoria thought she had everything under control. She had no idea that I knew about her double life, her racist posts, her plans to cut me out of Christopher's life permanently. But I had one more surprise for her. I called the pastor of their church, Reverend Matthews, and asked for a meeting. Reverend, I need to discuss something important about Christopher's baptism. I think you should know about some concerns I have regarding the spiritual environment he's being raised in. Pastor Matthews agreed to meet me the next day. I brought printed copies of Victoria's racist posts, her emails about erasing Christopher's black heritage, and her social media lies. Reverend, this is who is presenting my grandson for baptism, a woman who posts on white nationalist websites and teaches him to be ashamed of half his heritage. Pastor Matthews read through the materials with growing horror. Mrs. Washington, this is deeply troubling. A baptism is about welcoming a child into God's family, not about racial superiority. I'm not asking you to cancel the baptism, Reverend. Christopher deserves to be welcomed into the church. But I think the congregation should know what kind of values Victoria Palmer really represents. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that when Victoria tries to silence me during the baptism, and she will, you let me sing. Let me sing loud enough for everyone to hear what she's trying to erase. Pastor Matthews was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Washington, I've been pastoring this church for 20 years. I've seen racism disguised as respectability before. If Victoria Palmer tries to silence gospel music in my sanctuary, she's going to find out that this is still God's house. I left that meeting knowing I had an ally. But I still had one more card to play. I called my sister Angela and my cousins Denise and Patricia. I need you all to come to Christopher's baptism, and I need you to bring your voices. What are you planning, Rose? Angela asked. I'm planning to teach Victoria Palmer that when you try to erase a black family, that family sings back louder than you ever imagined. The night before the baptism, I had everything in place. The evidence of Victoria's racism printed and ready. Pastor Matthews prepared for Victoria's inevitable attempt to control the service. My family ready to fill that church with the gospel music Victoria was so ashamed of. Victoria had spent 3 years systematically erasing me from my grandson's life. Tomorrow, I was going to erase her from mine, and everyone she had been trying to impress was going to witness her destruction. The morning of the baptism, I woke up at 5 a.m. I had barely slept, going over my plan again and again. I put on my best black dress, the one I wore to important church events, and my grandmother's pearl necklace. I wanted to look dignified when I destroyed Victoria Palmer's life. By 7 a.m., I was already at the church, helping Pastor Matthews set up for the service. I had given him copies of all the evidence against Victoria, and he had agreed to let me handle things my way. Mrs. Washington, he said, as we arranged the flowers around the baptismal font, are you sure you want to do this? Once you start, there's no going back. Pastor, my grandson is about to be baptized by a woman who posts on white supremacist websites. If I don't speak up now, when will I? He nodded grimly. Then we do this right. In God's house, truth comes before politeness. At 9 a.m., Marcus arrived with Victoria and Christopher. Victoria was wearing a white designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. She looked perfect, polished, like she owned the world. Christopher ran over to hug me. Grandma Rose, are you going to sing at my baptism? Victoria's smile tightened. Christopher, remember what Mommy told you. Today is a quiet, respectful ceremony. But I like when Grandma sings, Christopher said innocently. I know, baby, Victoria said, kneeling down to his level. But different churches have different rules. We need to be respectful of how they do things here. She was already starting, already making my gospel tradition seem inappropriate for their church. At 9:30, Victoria's family started arriving. Her parents, Richard and Susan Palmer, walked in wearing matching expressions of disdain as they looked around the predominantly black church. Her sister Jennifer brought her 2 blonde children who stared openly at the black families around them. I watched Richard Palmer whisper something to his wife and point at the church's gospel choir photos on the wall. Susan Palmer actually wrinkled her nose. Then my family arrived. Angela walked in first, followed by my cousins Denise and Patricia and their children. My nephew David brought his wife and their twin boys. By the time my extended family had filled 3 pews, The church had gotten noticeably louder with greetings, hugs, and laughter. Victoria's face went white when she saw them. "Marcus," she hissed, grabbing his arm, "you didn't tell me your mother was bringing the entire—" She caught herself before she said it, but I knew what word had been on the tip of her tongue. "The entire what, Victoria?" I asked, walking over to them with a sweet smile. "The entire family?" "Of course," Victoria said quickly. "It's wonderful that Christopher has so much support." At 10 a.m. sharp, the service began. Pastor Matthews welcomed everyone and explained the significance of baptism. The church was packed, Victoria's white family clustered together on one side, my black family spread throughout the sanctuary, and the regular congregation filling the remaining seats. Everything was going normally until Pastor Matthews called the families forward for the baptism ceremony. Victoria stepped forward first, carrying Christopher. Marcus followed. I started to join them, but Victoria turned and whispered, "Rose, this is just for the parents. I'm his grandmother. I've been raising him since he was born. Yes, but the baptism is for immediate family only." Pastor Matthews overheard and spoke up loudly enough for the whole congregation to hear. "Mrs. Palmer, we welcome all family members to participate in baptisms. Grandparents, godparents, anyone who will be part of this child's spiritual journey." Victoria's jaw tightened, but she couldn't argue with the pastor in front of everyone. As we gathered around the baptismal font, Pastor Matthews began reading from Scripture about welcoming children into God's family. The congregation was quiet, respectful, listening. That's when Victoria made her first mistake. Christopher started humming quietly. A gospel song I had taught him called "This Little Light of Mine." It was barely audible, just a little boy's innocent humming during a church service. Victoria immediately leaned down and whispered harshly, "Christopher, stop that. Be quiet." But Christopher kept humming, lost in his own little world. Victoria grabbed his arm, not hard, but firmly enough that several people noticed. I said, "Stop." Christopher looked confused and hurt. He stopped humming and looked up at me with those big brown eyes, like he was asking if he had done something wrong. That's when I made my decision. I started singing, softly at first, picking up the melody Christopher had been humming. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Christopher's face lit up and he started singing with me, his sweet little voice joining mine. Victoria's face went red. She leaned over and hissed in my ear, "Rose, stop it. This is not appropriate." But Pastor Matthews was smiling, and several members of the congregation were starting to nod along with the music. I sang a little louder, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Angela joined in from the congregation, then Denise and Patricia. Soon half the church was singing along. That's when Victoria lost control completely. "Stop," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is supposed to be a proper ceremony, not some... She caught herself again, but the damage was done. The entire church had gone silent, and everyone was staring at her. Pastor Matthews stepped forward. "Mrs. Palmer, is there a problem with gospel music in our sanctuary?" "No, of course not," Victoria said quickly. "I just think we should follow proper baptism protocols." "The proper protocol," Pastor Matthews said firmly, "is to welcome this child with joy and music, the way Jesus welcomed children. If you have a problem with that, perhaps we should discuss your concerns privately." Victoria realized she was trapped. She couldn't openly object to gospel music in a black church without exposing her racism. But she also couldn't stand the idea of Christopher's baptism being filled with what she privately called urban nonsense. "Perhaps," she said with a forced smile, "we could sing something more, universal, like Amazing Grace." I smiled back at her, just as fake and 10 times more dangerous. "Victoria, that's a wonderful suggestion. I'd love to sing Amazing Grace for my grandson's baptism." I took a deep breath and started singing Amazing Grace in the full, powerful gospel style I had learned growing up in the church. My voice filled every corner of that sanctuary, backed by the natural acoustics and the Holy Spirit. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Victoria's face went from red to purple. This wasn't the quiet, restrained hymn she had wanted. This was full-throated, hand-clapping, soul-stirring gospel music at its finest. The congregation started clapping along. People were saying, "Amen," and "Yes, Lord," and "Sing it, sister." Victoria leaned over and whispered viciously in my ear, "I told you not to sing those songs." But she had whispered just a little too loudly, and Pastor Matthews had been standing close enough to hear every word. The music stopped abruptly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Palmer," Pastor Matthews said, his voice carrying throughout the silent church. "Did you just tell this child's grandmother not to sing gospel music at his baptism?" Victoria realized her mistake immediately. Every eye in the church was on her, and she had just been caught telling a black grandmother not to sing black church music. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Pastor Matthews asked. "Because it sounded like you were objecting to our musical traditions." Victoria looked around desperately. Her family was staring at her with horrified expressions. My family was watching with barely contained anger. The regular congregation was murmuring among themselves. "I just meant, I thought we should be more dignified." The word hung in the air like a curse. Dignified. As if our gospel music wasn't dignified. As if our traditions weren't worthy of her son's baptism. Pastor Matthews had heard enough. "Mrs. Palmer, in this church, we believe that all of God's music is dignified. Gospel music, hymns, spirituals, they all have a place in worship. If you can't accept that, perhaps you need to examine your heart before we proceed with this baptism." Victoria was trapped. She couldn't argue with the pastor without exposing her racism further. But she also couldn't back down without losing face in front of her family and friends. That's when I played my trump card. "Pastor Matthews," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I think Victoria might be more comfortable if she understood that this is my grandson's heritage. This is the music of his people, his ancestors, his culture. When she married my son, she married into our family traditions." Victoria's eyes flashed with rage. "His heritage? Christopher is half Palmer. He has my heritage too." "Of course he does," I said sweetly. "And what exactly is the Palmer heritage, Victoria?" She opened her mouth to answer, but I had done my homework. Because I was curious about your family history, so I did some research. Very interesting what I found about the Palumbo family from Newark. Victoria went white as a sheet. "How did you—" "Oh, I found out a lot of things," I said, pulling a folder out of my purse. "Like how you tell people online that you married a half-breed, but your son passes for white." The entire church gasped. Victoria's mother started crying. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. "I also found out how you enrolled Christopher in school as white only, and how you've been telling your friends that he gets his looks from his Italian grandfather." I opened the folder and pulled out printed copies of Victoria's social media posts and private messages. "Would you like me to read some of your posts about maintaining racial purity and protecting white children from cultural contamination?" Victoria lunged for the papers, but Pastor Matthews stepped between us. "Mrs. Palmer, is this true? Have you been posting racist content online while pretending to be part of our church family?" The silence was deafening. Victoria looked around desperately, but there was no way out. Her own words were printed in black and white for everyone to see. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I was trying to protect Christopher. I was trying to give him opportunities." "By denying half of who he is?" Marcus finally spoke up, his voice shaking with anger. "By teaching him to be ashamed of his own grandmother?" "I never said he should be ashamed. You told him he couldn't tell his classmates about me," I said quietly. "You told him people wouldn't want to be his friend if he acted too much like my side of the family." Christopher had been standing quietly through all of this, holding Marcus's hand, watching the adults argue. But now he spoke up in his clear little voice. "Mommy, why did you say mean things about Grandma Rose on the computer?" Everyone turned to look at this 4-year-old boy, innocent and confused, asking the question that cut right to the heart of everything. Victoria knelt down to Christopher's level, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, Mommy was just trying to— Did you really say Grandma Rose is different because she doesn't look like us?" Victoria couldn't answer. She couldn't lie to her son's face in front of a church full of witnesses, but she also couldn't admit the truth. Christopher let go of Marcus's hand and walked over to me. "Grandma Rose, I love your songs. I love your food. I love your stories. I don't want to be ashamed of you." He wrapped his little arms around my waist and buried his face in my dress. The church was silent except for the sound of Victoria sobbing. Pastor Matthews finally spoke. "I think we need to postpone this baptism until the family can resolve these issues. A child can't be welcomed into God's family when that family is divided by hatred and deception." Victoria stood up, her perfect appearance ruined by tears and smeared makeup. "This is all her fault," she said, pointing at me. "She planned this. She set me up." "I didn't make you post on white nationalist websites," I said calmly. "I didn't make you lie about your family history. I didn't make you teach Christopher to hide his black heritage. You did all of that yourself." Victoria's family was already gathering their things, clearly embarrassed and angry. Her father grabbed her arm roughly. "Victoria, we're leaving." This was a mistake from the beginning. As the Palmer family filed out of the church, Victoria turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Rose. You can't take my son away from me." "I'm not taking him anywhere," I replied. "But you just showed everyone in this church exactly who you really are. And once people know the truth about you, Victoria, they can't unknow it." After they left, the church was quiet for several minutes. Then Pastor Matthews spoke to the congregation. "Brothers and sisters, we have witnessed something painful today. But sometimes pain is necessary for healing. This child needed his community to know that he is loved for all of who he is, not just the parts some people find acceptable." Christopher was still holding on to me. Marcus knelt down beside us, tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected both of you." "The important thing," I said, "is that you see it now." As we left the church that day, I knew Victoria Palmer's perfect life was over. By Monday, everyone in their social circle would know what she had said and done. Her carefully constructed image as a progressive, inclusive person would be destroyed by her own words. But more importantly, Christopher would grow up knowing that he never had to be ashamed of who he was. And that was worth destroying 1,000 Victoria Palmers. That evening, after Marcus took Christopher home, I sat in my living room going through everything that had happened. My phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from relatives who had heard about the church incident. But the call that surprised me most was from Pastor Matthews. "Mrs. Washington, I wanted you to know that 3 families from Victoria's social circle have called the church office. They all want to know if what happened today is true." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that everything you revealed was documented and verified. I also told them that this church doesn't tolerate racism in any form, even when it's disguised as respectability." How did they react? 2 of the families said they would be re-evaluating their association with the Palmer family. The 3rd family said they always suspected Victoria wasn't what she appeared to be. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread beyond just the church community. Someone had recorded part of the baptism confrontation on their phone, and the video was circulating on social media. I watched the clip on my laptop. You could clearly hear Victoria saying, "I told you not to sing those songs," and see her grabbing Christopher's arm. You could see her face when I mentioned her social media posts, and hear her desperate attempts to defend herself. The comments on the video were overwhelmingly supportive of me and critical of Victoria. This woman tried to erase that child's heritage. The grandmother handled this with so much grace and dignity. Imagine being so racist that you can't stand gospel music at your own child's baptism. But the real fallout was happening in Victoria's real life. Marcus called me Wednesday evening. "Mom, Victoria's been fired from her job." Victoria worked at an upscale private school as an admissions counselor. The same school where she had been telling people about her Mediterranean husband and Italian in-laws. "The school board saw the video," Marcus continued. "They said they couldn't have someone in admissions who had been caught lying about racial backgrounds. Parents were already calling to complain." "How is she handling it?" "Not well. She's been locked in the bedroom for 2 days, crying and making phone calls to her friends. Most of them aren't calling her back. And how are you handling it? There was a long pause. Mom, I keep thinking about all the times she made comments that I should have questioned. All the times she steered conversations away from our family history or made excuses for why you couldn't be included in things. I thought she was just particular. I didn't realize she was systematically trying to erase you from Christopher's life. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I can't stay married to someone who tried to teach my son to be ashamed of his own heritage. I can't trust her around Christopher anymore. Thursday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Victoria's mother, Susan Palmer, knocked on my door at 8 a.m. She looked like she had aged 10 years since Sunday. Her perfectly styled hair was messy, her makeup was smeared, and she was clutching a tissue. Mrs. Washington, I need to talk to you. I let her in, curious about what she could possibly have to say. I want to apologize, she said, sitting on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid to get comfortable. I want to apologize for my daughter and for the things our family said about you. What things? The jokes, the comments about Christopher's ethnic side, the way we talked about your family traditions like they were less than ours. She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Victoria learned her attitudes from us, from Richard and me. We raised her to think that being white was better, that having money meant being superior to people who looked different or lived differently. I handed her a fresh tissue and waited for her to continue. But watching that video, seeing how you handled everything with such dignity while Victoria fell apart, I realized we were wrong. About everything. Why are you telling me this? Because Victoria is my daughter, and I love her, but she's lost everything because of the hatred we taught her. Her job, her friends, her reputation, and she's about to lose her family too. That's not my fault. No, it's not. It's ours. Richard and I raised a racist, and we're the ones who should be ashamed. Susan Palmer sat in my living room for another hour, telling me about the phone calls from country club members canceling social events, the neighbors who were avoiding her at the grocery store, the charity board that had asked her to resign. Everyone we know has seen that video. Everyone knows what kind of people we really are. And how does that make you feel? Horrible, embarrassed, but also confused. Because part of me still doesn't understand what we did wrong. And that scares me more than anything. At least she was honest. Mrs. Palmer, the fact that you're here talking to me shows that you're capable of growth, but your daughter isn't ready for that conversation yet. Would you consider talking to her, trying to help her understand? Why would I do that? Because if she doesn't change, she's going to lose Christopher forever. And despite everything, she does love that boy. I thought about it for a moment. I'll consider it. But only if she comes here herself, without Marcus, without you, and acknowledges what she did wrong. Not excuses, not explanations. Acknowledgement. Susan Palmer nodded gratefully and left. That evening, Marcus called again. Mom, Victoria wants to meet with you. She says she's ready to apologize and try to make things right. Is she really ready, or is she just desperate? I think she's both. But she's finally starting to understand that she can't blame this on anyone but herself. Fine. But it happens on my terms, in my house, with just the two of us. No mediators, no excuses, no deflecting blame. I'll let her know. Friday evening, Victoria Palmer knocked on my door. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had tried to control Christopher's baptism 5 days earlier. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her clothes were wrinkled. She looked like someone who hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said quietly. I let her in, but didn't offer her coffee or try to make her comfortable. This wasn't a social visit. Victoria, your mother says you want to apologize. I'm listening. She sat on the edge of the sofa, just like her mother had, and took a shaky breath. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About Christopher's heritage. About trying to erase your family from his life. Why were you wrong? Because I was raised to think that being white was better, and I never questioned it. I thought I was protecting Christopher by helping him fit into white society, but I was really just teaching him to hate half of himself. It was a start, But it wasn't enough. What about the social media posts? The white nationalist forums? Victoria's face crumpled. I was angry. I felt like I was losing control of my family, like you were taking Marcus and Christopher away from me. Those posts, they made me feel powerful, like I was fighting back. But I was really just confirming my own worst impulses. And what about telling Christopher he couldn't talk about me at school? I thought if his classmates knew he had a black grandmother, they would treat him differently. I thought I was protecting him from racism, but I was really just teaching him to participate in it. Victoria talked for another hour, going through each of her actions and admitting how wrong they had been. She wasn't making excuses or trying to justify anything. She was just acknowledging the damage she had done. "Victoria," I said when she finished, "I appreciate you coming here and owning up to what you did. But apologies don't undo 3 years of psychological damage to my grandson. I know. And I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know that I understand now. And I want to do better." What does doing better look like to you? Therapy. Real therapy, not just marriage counseling. I need to understand how I became someone who could hate my own family. And I need to learn how to be a mother who celebrates all of who Christopher is, not just the parts I'm comfortable with. And if Marcus divorces you, then I'll have to live with that. I'll have to live with knowing that I destroyed my family because I couldn't let go of my parents' racism. Victoria left that evening with no promises from me, no guarantees that her marriage could be saved or her relationship with Christopher repaired. But for the first time since I had met her, she seemed like someone who might actually be capable of change. Whether that change would come in time to save her family remained to be seen. The following Monday, everything came to a head in a way I hadn't expected. Marcus called me at 7 in the morning, his voice shaking. "Mom, Victoria's gone. She left sometime during the night. She took some clothes and her car, but she left Christopher here with me." "Where did she go?" "I don't know. She left a note saying she couldn't face what she had done and needed time to think. She said Christopher would be better off without her for a while." Part of me felt relieved. Victoria was out of our lives, at least temporarily. But another part of me worried about what her desperation might lead her to do. How is Christopher handling it? He keeps asking where Mommy went and when she's coming back. I don't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth. That Mommy made some mistakes and needs time to think about how to fix them. "Can you come over?" I don't know how to handle this alone. I drove to Marcus and Victoria's house immediately. Christopher ran into my arms the moment I walked through the door. Grandma rose, Mommy left, and didn't say goodbye. Did I do something wrong? My heart broke for this little boy who was blaming himself for his mother's actions. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. Mommy is dealing with some grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you." But Victoria's disappearance was just the beginning of the drama. That afternoon, Richard Palmer showed up at Marcus's house, furious and demanding answers. "Where is my daughter?" he shouted at Marcus. "What did you people do to drive her away?" "What we did?" Marcus replied, his own anger flaring. "Your daughter was posting on white nationalist websites and trying to erase my mother from my son's life. She did this to herself. She was protecting that boy from your ghetto family." The words hung in the air like a slap. Richard Palmer had just said out loud what his family had been thinking all along. Marcus stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might hit his father-in-law. "Get out of my house, now! You can't keep me from my grandson. Christopher is my son. And after what your family put him through, you're lucky I'm letting you leave instead of calling the police." Richard Palmer left, but not before making it clear that this wasn't over. Wednesday evening, I was at Marcus's house helping with Christopher's bedtime routine when the doorbell rang. Marcus answered it and came back looking grim. "Mom, there's a social worker here. Someone called Child Protective Services." My blood ran cold. I knew immediately who had made that call. The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Ms. Rodriguez, sat in the living room with her clipboard and asked pointed questions about Christopher's living situation. "Mr. Hayes, I understand your wife recently left the home. Are you able to provide adequate care for your son?" "Of course I am." My mother has been helping with childcare for years. And Mrs. Washington, what is your role in this household? I'm Christopher's grandmother. I've been his primary caregiver since he was born while his parents worked. Ms. Rodriguez made notes. I received a complaint alleging that this child is being exposed to inappropriate cultural influences and that his mother left because she feared for his welfare. That's a lie, Marcus said immediately. Victoria left because she was exposed as a racist who was trying to erase my family from Christopher's life. The complaint also alleges that Mrs. Washington has been alienating the child from his mother's family and exposing him to radical ideologies. I couldn't help but laugh, which clearly wasn't the reaction Ms. Rodriguez expected. Ma'am, what ideologies exactly? Teaching him gospel songs? Making him Sunday dinner? Telling him to be proud of his heritage? The complaint mentions religious extremism and racial indoctrination. Religious extremism? I take him to Baptist church. Racial indoctrination? I teach him Black history. Ms. Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable as she realized how ridiculous the complaint sounded when stated out loud. I'm required to interview the child alone, she said finally. Christopher was brought downstairs, and Ms. Rodriguez asked him gentle questions about his life, his family, how he felt at home. Do you feel safe living with Daddy and Grandma Rose? Yes. They take good care of me. Has anyone ever said mean things about Mommy's family? Christopher thought about this seriously. Mommy said mean things about Grandma Rose. She said Grandma's songs were too loud and her food was weird. But Grandma Rose never said mean things about Mommy. How do you feel about Mommy being gone? Sad, but also relieved? Is that bad? Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward. Why do you feel relieved, Christopher? Because now I don't have to pretend I don't know Grandma Rose at school. Mommy said I couldn't talk about her because people wouldn't understand. But I love Grandma Rose, and I was tired of keeping secrets. After Christopher went back upstairs, Ms. Rodriguez closed her notebook. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Washington, I've seen enough. The complaint appears to be retaliatory and without merit. This child is clearly well cared for and emotionally secure. But she wasn't finished. However, I do have concerns about the ongoing conflict between the families. Children need stability, and this situation seems volatile. What do you recommend? Marcus asked. Family counseling, and some kind of resolution with your wife, either reconciliation or formal separation. This limbo isn't healthy for anyone. The next day, Victoria finally surfaced. She called Marcus from her sister's house in Connecticut. I want to come home, she said. I want to try to fix our family. Victoria, you can't just disappear and then come back like nothing happened. I know. I've been seeing a therapist here. I'm ready to do the work. What work? Anti-racism training. Therapy. Whatever it takes to become the wife and mother you both deserve. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I need to think about it. And I need to talk to Mom and Christopher. That evening, the three of us sat down for a serious conversation. Christopher, Marcus said gently, Mommy wants to come home and try to be a better mother. How do you feel about that? Christopher was quiet for a long time, playing with his toy cars while he thought, will she still tell me not to sing Grandma's songs? If she comes back, there will be rules. No more trying to hide who you are or who your family is. Will she say sorry to Grandma Rose? She'll have to if she wants to be part of this family again. Christopher nodded slowly. Okay. But if she's mean again, will you make her leave? Yes. If she can't love and respect all of us, she can't stay. Friday morning, Victoria returned. She looked different, humbler, more uncertain. The arrogant confidence that had defined her was gone. She knocked on the door instead of using her key. When Marcus let her in, she went immediately to Christopher. Baby, Mommy is so sorry for leaving. That was wrong, and I promise I'll never do it again. Christopher hugged her, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. Then Victoria turned to me. Rose, I owe you an apology. A real one. She knelt down in front of where I was sitting, putting herself physically lower than me. I tried to erase you from Christopher's life because I was threatened by how much he loved you. I was jealous of your relationship with him and with Marcus. Instead of trying to earn my place in the family, I tried to destroy yours." She was crying now, but her voice remained steady. "I posted racist things online because it made me feel powerful to hate you instead of dealing with my own insecurities. I taught Christopher to be ashamed of his heritage because I was ashamed of my own prejudices." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm asking for a chance to earn your forgiveness. Not because I deserve it, but because Christopher deserves a family that isn't divided by hatred." I looked at this woman who had caused so much pain, who had tried to steal my grandson's identity, who had nearly destroyed our family. "Victoria, I don't forgive you yet, but I'm willing to see if you can change." What would that look like? Therapy. Real therapy. Not just a few sessions to get back in the house. Anti-racism education. Community service. And most importantly, you actively work to repair the damage you did to Christopher's sense of self. And if I do all that, then we'll see. But Victoria, understand this. One more incident, one more racist comment, one more attempt to hide Christopher's heritage, and you're gone permanently. Victoria nodded, still kneeling in front of me. "I understand, and thank you for giving me this chance. But I wasn't done. There's one more condition. Your father is banned from this house and from any contact with Christopher until he also acknowledges what he did wrong. My father will never, then your father will never see his grandson again. Choose, Victoria." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing her family relationships against her marriage and her child. "Okay, I'll tell him." As Victoria unpacked her suitcase that evening, I realized that our family crisis wasn't really over. It was entering a new phase. Victoria was back, but she was different, humbled, uncertain. The question was whether this change was real or just another performance. Only time would tell if she was truly capable of becoming the mother and daughter-in-law we needed her to be. But for now, Christopher had both his parents back, and that was what mattered most. The first test of Victoria's supposed transformation came just 3 days after she returned home. Christopher had a school project about family heritage, and he was excited to include both sides of his background. He had drawn a family tree with pictures of all his relatives, including my parents and my late husband. When Victoria saw the project spread out on the kitchen table, I watched her face carefully. The old Victoria would have found some way to minimize my family's presence or suggest Christopher focus more on her side. Instead, she knelt down next to Christopher and asked, "Tell me about Great-Grandpa Robert. What do you want people to know about him?" Christopher launched into stories I had told him about his grandfather's military service and his work as a mechanic. Victoria listened without interrupting, without trying to redirect the conversation. But the real test came when Christopher asked, "Mommy, can you help me write about great-great-grandma Sarah? Grandma Rose says she was born a slave but became a teacher." I held my breath, waiting for Victoria's response. "I don't know much about great-great-grandma Sarah," Victoria said carefully. "But Grandma Rose can tell us both about her. I'd like to learn too." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. The old Victoria would never have admitted ignorance about Black history or asked to learn from me. However, Victoria's family wasn't adjusting to the new reality as well as she was. The following Sunday, Richard Palmer showed up at Marcus's house unannounced, clearly having ignored Victoria's instructions to stay away. He pushed past Marcus when he answered the door and stormed into the living room where Victoria, Christopher, and I were watching a movie. "Victoria, this is ridiculous. You're destroying our family over some politically correct nonsense. Dad, I asked you not to come here. And I'm not going to be kept from my grandson by these people. These people." He was looking right at me when he said it. Christopher immediately moved closer to me on the couch, sensing the tension. "Richard," I said calmly, "you need to leave. I don't take orders from you in my daughter's house." "It's not your daughter's house," Marcus said firmly. "It's my house, and I'm telling you to leave. Not until I talk sense into Victoria." Richard Palmer pulled out his phone and showed Victoria something on the screen. "Look at this. The video from the church has been shared over 50,000 times. People are calling our family racist. Your mother can't show her face at the country club." "Maybe because we were racist," Victoria said quietly. We were not racist. We were trying to protect Christopher from being labeled and limited by his circumstances. His circumstances? You mean being black? I mean being mixed in a world that won't understand him. Christopher looked up from where he was sitting beside me. Grandpa Richard, what's wrong with being mixed? The room went dead silent. This 4-year-old boy had just asked the question that cut through all the euphemisms and polite language. Richard Palmer looked down at his grandson with confusion and something that might have been shame. Nothing's wrong with you, Christopher. You're perfect. Then why do you say mean things about Grandma Rose? She's mixed too, right? Her mom was black and her dad was Cherokee. I had told Christopher stories about his great-great-grandmother who had been part Native American. But I hadn't expected him to use that information to challenge his grandfather. Richard Palmer had no answer for that question. Victoria stood up and walked over to her father. Dad, Christopher is asking you to explain why you think part of his heritage is something to be ashamed of. Can you do that? I never said to be ashamed. You called Grandma Rose's family ghetto. You said Christopher was lucky he doesn't look too ethnic. You made jokes about urban culture. What message do you think that sends to a child? Richard Palmer looked around the room, at his daughter confronting him, at his grandson questioning him, at Marcus watching him with barely concealed anger, at me sitting calmly while his world fell apart. I was trying to protect him from discrimination. By teaching him to discriminate against himself? Richard Palmer had no answer for that either. Dad, I love you. But until you can look at Christopher and see all of who he is as something beautiful, you can't be part of his life. You're choosing them over your own father? I'm choosing my son over prejudice, even when that prejudice comes from my own father. Richard Palmer left without another word. But as he walked out, I heard him mutter, She's lost her damn mind. Victoria heard it too. She followed him to the door and called out, Dad, the only thing I've lost is my willingness to pretend racism is love. After he left, Victoria came back to the living room and sat down heavily. I'm sorry, she said to all of us. I'm sorry you had to witness that. I'm sorry Christopher had to hear those things. How do you feel? Marcus asked her. Sad, angry, but also relieved? I've been making excuses for him my whole life. It feels good to stop. Christopher climbed into Victoria's lap. Mommy, are you okay? I'm okay, baby. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. Like you're protecting me from Grandpa Richard's mean words? Exactly like that. That evening, after Christopher was in bed, the three of us sat down for a serious conversation about what came next. Victoria, I said, you stood up to your father today. That took courage. It should have happened years ago. But it happened today. That's what matters. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now we keep doing the work, Victoria said. I have therapy twice a week. I'm reading books about racism and white privilege. I'm volunteering at a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood. And how is that going? It's hard. I'm realizing how much I don't know about the world Christopher is going to grow up in. I'm learning how much damage I could have done if you hadn't stopped me. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then continued. The therapist says, I need to understand that this isn't about becoming a perfect person overnight. It's about doing better every day and being honest about my mistakes. What mistakes are you seeing now that you couldn't see before? I asked. Everything. The way I talked about your food being different instead of delicious. The way I steered conversations away from black history or culture. The way I made Christopher feel like he had to choose between being accepted and being authentic. She started crying again. I almost stole his identity from him. I almost made him ashamed of being your grandson. But you didn't, Marcus said firmly. He knows who he is because Rose made sure of it. Which is why, Victoria said, looking directly at me, I need to ask you something, Rose. Would you be willing to teach me about your family history, about the traditions I tried to erase, about how to raise a black child in this world? The question caught me off guard. Victoria was asking me to educate her about the very culture she had tried to eliminate from Christopher's life. Why would you want to learn from me? Because I can't be the mother Christopher needs if I don't understand all of who he is. And I can't understand who he is if I don't understand where he comes from. I looked at this woman who had caused so much pain, who was now asking me to help her heal the wounds she had created. Victoria, I'll consider it. But not because I've forgiven you, because Christopher deserves parents who celebrate all of who he is. That's all I'm asking for. As Victoria went upstairs to check on Christopher, Marcus and I sat in the quiet living room. "Do you think she's really changed?" he asked. "I think she's trying to change. Whether she succeeds depends on how committed she is when the work gets harder. And if she fails, then we'll protect Christopher from the fallout. But Marcus, I think she might actually make it this time." "Why?" "Because she lost everything, her job, her friends, her father's approval, and she's still here, doing the work. That tells me this isn't just about getting her life back. It's about becoming someone worthy of the life she almost lost. Time would tell if Victoria Palmer could truly transform from the woman who had tried to erase my family into someone who could celebrate it. But for tonight, Christopher was safe, loved, and proud of all parts of himself. And that was enough for now. 6 months later, Victoria's transformation was being put to the ultimate test. Christopher's school was having a Heritage Day celebration where each child would present something about their family's cultural background. In the past, Victoria would have steered this toward her European ancestry or found some excuse for Christopher not to participate. Instead, she came to me with a request that shocked me. "Rose, I want Christopher to present both sides of his heritage. But I need your help because I don't know enough about our family history to do it justice." "Our family history?" "Christopher's family history, which includes your family, whether I like it or not, and I'm learning to like it." We spent 2 weeks preparing Christopher's presentation. Victoria listened as I told stories about my grandmother, who was born into slavery but learned to read. She took notes when I explained about my husband's military service during segregation. She asked questions about family recipes and gospel music traditions. But the real test came when we went shopping for Christopher's Heritage Day costume. "Grandma Rose," Christopher said as we walked through the store, "can I dress like great-great-grandpa Robert in his army uniform?" "Of course, baby." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then said, "Christopher, what if we make a display showing both sides of your family? Great-great-grandpa Robert's uniform, and maybe something from my Italian great-grandfather, too." It was the first time Victoria had acknowledged that her family's story was also part of Christopher's heritage, without trying to make it the only part that mattered. Heritage Day was a complete success. Christopher stood proudly in his presentation, talking about his great-great-grandfather's military service, his great-great-grandmother who became a teacher after slavery ended, and yes, his Italian great-great-grandfather who immigrated to America. Victoria videotaped the entire presentation, tears streaming down her face. After the event, one of the other mothers approached Victoria. "Your son's presentation was beautiful. You must be so proud of your family's history." The old Victoria would have said, "Thank you. We are very proud of our heritage," focusing on the European side. Instead, she said, "We're proud of all of Christopher's heritage. His black ancestors overcame incredible obstacles, and his white ancestors worked to build better lives. He comes from strong people on both sides." It was a small moment, but it represented a massive shift in how Victoria saw our family. However, not everyone was happy with Victoria's transformation. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from Susan Palmer, Victoria's mother. "Rose, I need to talk to you about Victoria. I'm worried about her." "Worried how?" "She's become obsessed with this racism thing. She talks about white privilege and systemic oppression like she's some kind of activist. It's not healthy." "Learning about racism isn't unhealthy, Susan. Ignoring it is what's unhealthy. But she's alienating her entire family. Richard won't speak to her. Her sister thinks she's lost her mind. She's throwing away her relationships with people who love her. For people who love her, you all sure were quick to abandon her when she started changing. We didn't abandon her. We just don't understand why she has to be so extreme about everything." "Extreme?" "She's learning about her son's heritage. She's trying to become a better mother. How is that extreme?" because she acts like everything we taught her was wrong. Like we're terrible people. Susan, were the things you taught her right? When you told her that Christopher was lucky he doesn't look too ethnic, was that right? Silence. When Richard made jokes about urban culture, was that love? More silence. Victoria isn't throwing away relationships with people who love her. She's setting boundaries with people who want to continue hurting her child. We never hurt Christopher. You taught his mother to be ashamed of half of who he is. If that's not hurting him, what is? Susan Palmer hung up on me. But Victoria's family's rejection of her transformation had an unexpected consequence. It brought her closer to my family. The following month, Angela was visiting from Atlanta, and she invited Victoria to join us for Sunday dinner. In the past, Victoria would have found an excuse not to come or would have sat quietly, clearly uncomfortable with our family's loud, affectionate dynamics. This time, she jumped right in. She helped in the kitchen, asked Angela about her work as a nurse, and laughed at my nephew David's terrible jokes. During dinner, Angela's granddaughter Keisha, who was 8 years old, asked Victoria, "Are you the lady who used to be mean to Grandma Rose?" The entire table went quiet. Children have a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. Victoria looked directly at Keisha and said, "Yes, I am. I was very mean to Grandma Rose because I didn't understand how important she was to Christopher. I was wrong, and I'm still learning how to be better." "Are you learning good?" Keisha asked. "I'm trying very hard to learn good," Keisha nodded solemnly. "Mama says when you do something wrong, you have to work extra hard to make it right. Your mama is very smart." After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Angela pulled me aside. "Rose, I have to say, I was prepared to hate that woman. But she seems genuine. She's trying." "No, it's more than trying." When Keisha asked her that question, she could have gotten defensive or made excuses. Instead, she took responsibility and explained it in a way a child could understand. That takes real growth. Over the next few months, Victoria continued to prove that her change was real. When Christopher's class did a unit on the civil rights movement, Victoria volunteered to help research family stories. She interviewed elderly members of my church about their experiences during segregation and helped Christopher understand how those stories connected to his own family history. When a new black family moved into the neighborhood and some of the other residents made unwelcoming comments, Victoria was the first person to invite them to dinner and introduce them to the community. When Christopher asked why some kids at school said mean things about black people, Victoria sat down with him and had an age-appropriate conversation about racism, using her own mistakes as examples of how people can learn and change. But the moment that convinced me Victoria's transformation was permanent happened on a random Tuesday evening in November. I was at Marcus's house babysitting Christopher while they went to a parent-teacher conference. Christopher was doing his homework at the kitchen table when his pencil broke. "Grandma Rose, can you help me sharpen this?" I got up to get the pencil sharpener from the drawer, but as I reached for it, I knocked over Christopher's glass of juice. The glass shattered, and orange juice spread across the floor. "Oh no," I said, grabbing paper towels. "I'm so clumsy." Christopher immediately started helping me clean up. "It's okay, Grandma. Accidents happen." Just as we finished cleaning up the mess, Marcus and Victoria came home. Victoria took one look at the scene, broken glass in the trash, wet paper towels in my hand, Christopher getting a mop from the closet, and immediately asked, "Is everyone okay? Rose, did you cut yourself?" The old Victoria would have sighed with annoyance at the mess or made some comment about being more careful. This Victoria's first concern was whether I was hurt. "I'm fine. Just broke a glass." "These things happen," Victoria said, taking the mop from Christopher. "Let me get this." It was such a small moment, but it showed me that Victoria's new way of thinking had become instinctive, not performed. Later that evening, after Christopher was in bed, Victoria sat down with me in the living room. "Rose, I need to tell you something." My guard went up slightly. In my experience, conversations that started that way rarely ended well. "I've been thinking about everything that happened last year, the baptism, the social media posts, all of it." "Okay." And I realized that I never properly thanked you. Thanked me? For what? For exposing me, for humiliating me, for destroying my comfortable little world of lies and prejudice. I stared at her, not sure I was hearing correctly. Victoria, I didn't do that to help you. I did it to protect Christopher. I know, but it helped me anyway. If you hadn't forced me to face what I was doing, I would have kept doing it. I would have taught Christopher to be ashamed of himself, and I would have destroyed my marriage and my relationship with him. Victoria was crying now, but they were tears of gratitude, not self-pity. You could have just quietly worked around me. You could have given Christopher pride in his heritage without exposing my racism publicly. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Why? Why did you choose public humiliation instead of private education? I thought about her question for a moment. Because private education would have allowed you to keep performing your racism behind closed doors. Public exposure forced you to actually change or lose everything. And you were willing to risk our family's stability to make that point. I was willing to risk a false peace to create the possibility of real peace. Victoria nodded slowly. Well, it worked. I lost my job, my friends, my father's approval, and my comfortable self-image. But I gained a real relationship with my son, a stronger marriage, and a family I actually deserve to be part of. Do you regret any of it? I regret the racism. I regret the pain I caused. I regret the time I wasted being someone I'm ashamed of. But I don't regret the consequences. They were exactly what I needed. Victoria stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. For the second time in our relationship, she knelt down in front of me. Rose Washington, will you forgive me? I looked down at this woman who had tried to steal my grandson's identity, who had posted racist content online, who had attempted to erase my family from Christopher's life. But I also saw the woman who had stood up to her father, who had voluntarily entered therapy, who had spent months learning about the culture she had once dismissed, who had genuinely transformed herself into someone worthy of my grandson's love. Yes, Victoria, I forgive you. She broke down crying and buried her face in my lap, sobbing like a child. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on our family. As I held this woman who had once been my enemy, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone who has wronged you. Sometimes it's forcing them to become someone better than they ever imagined they could be. Victoria Palmer had tried to erase my family from my grandson's life. Instead, she had become part of it. The true test of Victoria's transformation came the following spring, when an incident at Christopher's school forced her to choose between her old comfort zone and her new principles. Christopher came home from first grade upset, telling us that a substitute teacher had made him stand up in front of the class and asked him to explain what it's like to be different. She said I was lucky to be light-skinned because I could pass for normal, Christopher said, tears in his eyes. What does that mean, Mommy? Victoria's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, and then determination. It means the teacher said something very wrong, and Mommy is going to make sure she understands why. The old Victoria might have been secretly pleased that Christopher was seen as passable, or she might have avoided confrontation altogether. This Victoria marched into that school the next morning like a woman on a mission. I went with her, expecting to provide backup, but Victoria didn't need it. I need to speak with Principal Johnson immediately, she told the secretary. Is this about yesterday's incident with Mrs. Patterson? Yes, it is. Principal Johnson, a black woman in her 50s, invited us into her office. She looked tired, like this wasn't the first complaint she'd received. Mrs. Hayes, I understand you're concerned about what happened in Mrs. Patterson's classroom. I'm not concerned, Victoria said firmly. I'm appalled. A substitute teacher told my 6-year-old son that he was lucky to be light-skinned because he could pass for normal. That is unacceptable. I agree completely. Mrs. Patterson will not be working in our district again. That's a start, but I'm also concerned about what this reveals about your screening process for substitutes. Principal Johnson raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean that a person doesn't just accidentally make comments about a child's skin color being an advantage. That kind of thinking is systemic. What training do your substitutes receive about racial sensitivity? I sat back and watched Victoria advocate for not just Christopher, but for all the children who might encounter similar situations. Mrs. Hayes, I appreciate your concern, but no, Victoria interrupted. You don't get to dismiss this. My son came home yesterday asking me what it means to pass for normal. Do you understand what that does to a child's sense of self-worth? Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Principal Johnson something. This is a recording of my son asking me why being light-skinned makes him lucky. 6 years old, and he's already being taught that darkness is something to overcome. Principal Johnson listened to the recording with a pained expression. What would you like me to do, Mrs. Hayes? I want mandatory racial sensitivity training for all staff, including substitutes. I want clear protocols for reporting incidents like this, and I want assurance that any teacher who makes similar comments will be immediately removed. That's quite an extensive request. It's an extensive problem. Victoria stood up, and I could see the steel in her spine that I had first witnessed at the baptism. But now it was being used to protect children instead of to perpetuate racism. Principal Johnson, 2 years ago, I would have been the parent making excuses for Mrs. Patterson. I would have said she meant well, or that children need to learn about the real world, or that we should just move on. And now I understand that teaching children that their worth depends on how close they come to whiteness is child abuse. And I won't tolerate it happening to my son or any other child. Principal Johnson was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. We'll implement the training program, and Mrs. Patterson's actions will be reported to the district office. As we left the school, I looked at Victoria with something I had never felt for her before. Genuine respect. You didn't have to fight that hard, I said. Yes, I did. Because if I don't fight for Christopher now, who will? And if I don't fight for other children too? What kind of person am I? The kind of person who used to be afraid of confrontation about race. That woman is dead, Rose. She died the day you exposed her at the baptism. This is who I am now. That evening, Victoria called a meeting with Marcus and me to discuss something she'd been thinking about. I want to do something with what happened to our family, she said. I want to turn it into something positive. Like what? I want to start a support group for white parents raising black children. Parents who need to learn what I had to learn, but maybe with less trauma involved. I was skeptical. Victoria, you've been working on this for less than 2 years. Are you qualified to teach other people? Not alone, but with you, with other black families willing to share their experiences, I think we could help people. Why would you want to do that? Because there are other Victoria Palmers out there right now, making the same mistakes I made, and there are children being harmed by parents who think they're protecting them. Victoria had clearly thought this through. She had researched existing programs, identified gaps in support services, and developed a preliminary curriculum. I'm not trying to be the white savior, she said. I'm trying to be the cautionary tale. The person who shows other white parents what happens when you try to erase your child's heritage. Marcus looked at me. What do you think, Mom? I thought about it for several minutes. Victoria had proven her commitment to change, but leading a support group would put her in a position of authority about issues she was still learning about. I think, I said slowly, that it could work if it's done right. If you're honest about your mistakes, if you center black voices, and if you're clear that you're sharing your failures, not your expertise. Would you be willing to co-facilitate with me? You want me to work with you on this? I want you to lead it, and I want to support you. I want to be the example of what not to do, and you be the example of how to heal from that damage. 6 months later, our support group had 12 families enrolled. Victoria shared her story at every meeting. The social media posts, the attempts to erase my family, the public humiliation at the baptism, and the long process of learning to change. I shared the perspective of a black grandmother who had watched her family being systematically erased and had had to fight to protect her grandson's identity. Together, we helped other families avoid the mistakes Victoria had made and heal from the damage that had already been done. The program was so successful that the local family services agency asked us to develop a formal curriculum that could be used in other communities. At the end of our first year, One of the mothers in the group approached Victoria after a meeting. "I need to thank you," she said. "When I first heard your story, I was angry at you. I thought you were a monster. But then I realized I was doing some of the same things to my daughter." "What changed for you?" "Seeing how much courage it took for you to admit your mistakes publicly and do the work to change. If you could transform yourself so completely, maybe I could too." "How is your daughter doing now?" "She's proud of who she is. She talks about her Black heritage the same way she talks about her white heritage, as something valuable and beautiful. That's all any of us can ask for." As I watched Victoria hug this mother, I realized that the woman who had once tried to steal my grandson's identity had become someone who helped other children claim theirs. Victoria Palmer had gotten the most complete revenge possible on the racist she used to be. She had killed that person and replaced her with someone worthy of respect. 5 years later, I'm sitting in my garden watching Christopher, now 11 years old, teach his younger cousin Marcus Jr. how to plant tomatoes. Victoria is beside me, helping organize the community garden event our support group is hosting. "Rose, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't exposed me at the baptism?" I think about her question while I watch the children play. Christopher is confident, proud of who he is, comfortable in his own skin. He switches easily between talking to his white classmates about video games and discussing family history with his Black relatives. "You would have kept going," I say simply. Christopher would have grown up ashamed of half of himself. Marcus would have lost his son trying to keep his wife happy. And you would have destroyed yourself with your own hatred. Do you think I would have ever realized what I was doing? Maybe, but probably too late to fix the damage. Victoria is quiet for a moment, watching Christopher show Marcus Jr. how to measure the spacing between plants. "I destroyed so much," she says. "My relationship with my father, my old friendships, my job. You destroyed things that were built on lies. What you built instead is real. It's true." Victoria's relationship with her father never recovered. Richard Palmer died 2 years ago without ever acknowledging that his racism was wrong. Victoria grieved for the father she had loved, but she didn't regret the boundaries she had set. Her friendship circle is completely different now. Instead of country club women who whispered about those people, Victoria surrounds herself with parents who are doing the real work of raising children across racial lines. Her career is different too. After being fired from the private school, Victoria went back to school to become a family therapist specializing in racial identity issues. She makes less money than she used to, but she finds her work meaningful in a way her previous job never was. "Christopher asked me something yesterday that made me think," Victoria says. "What was that?" "He asked me why I used to be racist. Not what happened or how I changed, but why I was that way in the first place." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I was taught to see differences as threats instead of gifts, that I was raised to think being white made me better, and I never questioned it until I had something to lose." Christopher walks over to us, dirt on his hands and a proud smile on his face. "Grandma Rose, look, Marcus Jr. planted his first tomato all by himself. That's wonderful, baby. You're a good teacher." "Victoria taught me how to teach," he says, putting his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "She says the best way to help someone learn is to let them make mistakes and figure out how to fix them." Victoria smiles at him. "And what's the most important thing about making mistakes?" "That you have to admit them and do better," Christopher recites, "and that everyone makes mistakes, even grown-ups." "Especially grown-ups," Victoria says, ruffling his hair. As Christopher runs back to help with the garden, Victoria and I sit in comfortable silence. "Rose, can I ask you something I've never asked before?" "Go ahead. Do you like me now? Not just tolerate me or forgive me, but actually like me as a person?" It's a vulnerable question, and it deserves an honest answer. "Victoria, I hated who you used to be. I hated the racism, the manipulation, the way you tried to steal Christopher's identity." Her face falls slightly. "But I admire who you've become. You could have made excuses or blamed others or given up when the work got hard. Instead, you did something most people never do. You fundamentally changed who you are. It wasn't a choice. You made sure of that. I created consequences. You chose how to respond to them. Victoria nods slowly. And now? Now you're someone I'm proud to call family. Not because of blood or marriage, but because of choice and growth and love. Even after everything I did? Because of everything you did to fix it. That evening, we're cleaning up after the community garden event when Marcus approaches us with a serious expression. Mom, Victoria, I need to tell you both something. We stop what we're doing and give him our attention. I've been thinking about writing a book about our family's experience. About the racism, the confrontation, the healing process. Victoria and I exchange glances. What kind of book, I ask? A memoir, about how a family almost destroyed itself with racism and how we found our way back to each other. Are you sure you want our story to be public like that? Victoria asks. I think our story could help other families, but only if both of you are comfortable with it. I think about all the families we've worked with in our support group, all the children who have been helped by Victoria's willingness to share her mistakes. If it helps other families heal, I say, then I'm willing. Victoria nods. I've been sharing our story in small groups for years. Maybe it's time to share it more broadly. There's one condition, Marcus says. We tell the whole truth. The ugly parts, the painful parts, all of it. The whole truth, Victoria agrees. Including how much I hurt both of you before I learned to change. 6 months later, Marcus's book, The Baptism, A Family's Journey from Racism to Redemption, is published. The reviews are mixed. Some people think Victoria got off too easy. Others think the story is too harsh on white families trying to do their best. But the letters we receive from readers tell a different story. A grandmother writes, "Thank you for showing me how my silence about my daughter-in-law's comments was hurting my grandson." A mother writes, "I recognized myself in Victoria's story and got help before I made the same mistakes." A teenager writes, "Your story helped me understand why my white mom sometimes says things that hurt and how I can talk to her about it." The book becomes a bestseller, but more importantly, it becomes a tool for families having difficult conversations about race and identity. On the first anniversary of the book's publication, we're invited to speak at a national conference on multiracial families. Victoria and I sit on a panel together, answering questions about our journey. Mrs. Washington, an audience member asks, "Do you regret exposing Victoria so publicly? Some people think you could have handled it more privately." I look out at the audience, hundreds of parents, grandparents, and advocates who are trying to raise children with healthy racial identities. I don't regret it for a second, I say. Private conversations allow people to keep their public masks on. Public consequences force real change. But wasn't it cruel to humiliate her in front of her community? What was cruel, I reply, was watching my grandson learn to be ashamed of his own heritage. Victoria's public embarrassment lasted a few months. The damage she was doing to Christopher would have lasted a lifetime. Victoria speaks up. I needed to be exposed. I needed to face consequences that matched the harm I was causing. If Rose had handled it privately, I might have just gotten better at hiding my racism instead of actually changing. What advice would you give to other families in similar situations? Victoria and I look at each other and smile. Don't wait for a crisis, I say. Have the hard conversations before someone gets hurt. And don't make excuses for racism just because it comes from family, Victoria adds. Love sometimes means setting boundaries, even with people you care about. After the conference, Victoria, Marcus, Christopher, and I have dinner together at a restaurant near the hotel. Grandma Rose, Christopher says, "Do you think our story has a happy ending?" I look around the table at this family we've rebuilt from the ashes of hatred and ignorance. I think our story has a true ending, I say, and sometimes that's better than happy. What's the difference? Happy endings pretend everything is perfect. True endings show that people can change, families can heal, and love can win, but only if everyone is willing to do the work. Christopher nods seriously, like he's filing away this wisdom for future use. Will you keep telling our story? As long as it helps other families, Victoria says. As long as there are children who need to learn they don't have to be ashamed of who they are. And as long as there are adults who need to learn that it's never too late to change, I add. As we walk back to the hotel that night, Christopher between Victoria and me, Marcus trailing behind us with a smile on his face. I think about how far we've all come. 5 years ago, Victoria tried to silence my voice at a baptism. Tonight, we're teaching others to find their voices together. That little boy who defended me at school, who said his grandma was worth more than his dad, was right in ways he couldn't have imagined. Family isn't about blood or marriage or convenience. Family is about showing up, speaking truth, and refusing to let hatred win. And sometimes, the best revenge is turning your enemy into family.